Thank you for joining us today. I am very excited. I know. I'm always very excited. It seems to be my theme, doesn't it? But I'm very excited that Jay Lewis is with us today. Jay works in one of my very favorite school districts and one of my very favorite schools. He's the principal there, and I had the benefit of being able to work with Jay prior to this school district and another school district as well. And this district, let me tell you, when I say that it has come so far in the last couple of years, it has come so far. When I first started in the school, I literally couldn't get through the front door without hearing screams and hollers for support and everything else. And Jay has really helped lead this team to a much more successful, safe, and regulated path that they are on. So, Jay, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I'm very excited.
It is exciting. So, I would love to talk about safety and how you have been able to address safety in your school. And I'm talking mainly about psychological safety, although physical safety is a concern in that district as well as in that school as well. But you have done a masterful job at helping staff feel safe, and in turn them helping their students feel safe, because that is something that I haven't seen there in a long time that I now am seeing when I come into your school.
Yeah. When I think about psychological safety for students and staff, two things come to my brain right away. And one of them is visibility, and the other one is support. When I'm in the school building, I'm not in my office for chunks of the day. I'm out of my office as much as I can be. And I think walking through the classroom, walking through the hallway, interacting with the kids, interacting with the staff, that creates the situation where they know that there is support, and that helps with that psychological safety. It negates that feeling of I'm all alone and I'm all by myself, and if something goes wrong and I need help, no help is coming.
Yeah.
Being visible creates the situation where they know help is coming.
Yeah, and that's huge. And that is a trend with every administrator that I have spoken with that has been on our podcast. They all say the same thing. It's huge about you have to be visible to your students and to your staff. They need to see your face and everything and feel that you're there and you're willing to work alongside of them about
Absolutely.
this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
How do you feel that your staff have evolved in the last couple of years? Because there's definitely been some changes that I've seen in your building in the
Yeah.
last couple of
You
years.
know, I think they are feeling more confident in their abilities to do some tier one and tier two classroom interventions. And again, it kind of goes back to that support piece as well. So for example, if a teacher tries to do some tier one and tier two interventions in his or her classroom and doesn't have the support from the administration, then the courage to try those things dissipates.
It
And what
really
you end
does.
up with is the teacher always calling for someone from the office to come remove the kiddo, or you end up with the teacher sending the kiddo out all of the time. Ultimately, here at my school, one of the things that we're working on is increasing the amount of time students spend learning, being in the classroom, working with their reading skills, working with their math skills. And the only way to accomplish that is to keep them in the room.
Yeah.
So I think giving those teachers some tier one and tier two interventions, and then being there to support that so that they know there will be follow through at the part of the administration, so that they know if they try something that doesn't work, what's going to come out of that is, okay, you tried it and it didn't work. Let's back up and try something else, as opposed to you tried this and it didn't work. So now I'm taking over. I think again, it comes back to that they have to know that there's support there.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are vital, because if they don't, you can't teach those higher skills. If they don't feel, the students don't feel safe, the staff don't feel safe, and people aren't regulated. You can't get to that point of learning. It's when you're teaching the information, you're like, the kid knew it yesterday, but they don't know it today. Well,
Right.
they probably weren't regulated when they were learning that. And that's something I touch on throughout my book, on how to make people feel safe, how to make them feel regulated. And we also go into that in our online course of these are the basic steps to go through, just in how you stand and how you present yourself to make the individual feel safe so that they can function at a much
Yeah.
higher level and learn.
So
Um,
true. So true.
yeah.
And, I have administrative friends who really, really want to not have the word COVID be at all in their vocabulary anymore. And I understand that. However, I do think that we are still, as a school system, I think we are still dealing with some of the fallout from the pandemic and from the extended periods of time of isolation and the extended periods of time of littles, because that's who is in my building, not having socialization with other littles, and then they come to school and it's a brand new experience
Yeah.
where they have never had anything like it before, because many of them have not been in a daycare setting, again somewhat due to COVID really changing the framework for how little kids are cared for when mom and dad are at work.
It truly did there. And so many people left the workforce through the COVID experience or right around that time period, or really felt discontented with what they were doing and decided to stay home and that sort of thing. And so it's a completely different landscape than it was. I was talking with a preschool teacher yesterday, and she's like, I've never had a group of kids that need so much support as this group of 4 or 5-year-olds. And
Right.
we're seeing that. And it's because it's a different area of how they were supported, coming up through the ranks and everything else.
Yeah.
And in learning how to operate in a school community is a completely different set of skills than what a child is going to learn at home,
Absolutely,
for
absolutely.
sure.
And I am optimistic that with a little bit more time, we'll start to see some level of return to how it was pre-pandemic kind of situation. But it is going to take a little bit of time to get there.
It is. And I often wonder, do we want to see it the way it was prior to the pandemic, or do we want it to be something else and maybe something better? And
Yeah,
I think
no,
it's just a matter
100%.
of, trying to work through where they are, because as you probably have seen, kids are not the same as they were 5 years ago, 8 years
Right.
ago, 10 years ago. They're different, and there's a different set of problems and a different set of challenges that they're experiencing. And they have a very different perspective on community and on school and on life. And we're oftentimes trying to address those new issues that they have with old techniques. And then we wonder why they don't work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we need a new set of techniques that address
Right.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and that's what I think everybody needs. And that's what we're trying to lay out, like the new set of techniques that will work so that they can be successful, so that the students can be successful and the teachers also feel successful, because that's a huge challenge that we have in this field, as we've seen so many people leave this field that are great people that we need in this.
Mm-hmm.
And in the education field, like many fields, is struggling to have enough people to support it. And
Oh, that's so true. That's so true.
finding that is really, it's really about them feeling validated and successful, because if they don't feel successful, they're not going to stay in the community for long term.
Nope, 100% true.
What do you feel are the best techniques for providing regulation to both your staff and your students?
For the students, actually for both students and staff, consistency of knowing what the response is going to be is ultimately the key. If the student, to back up a little bit, so many of the kiddos that come to my building don't have that level of consistency. And so what happens, a response on one day at home will be totally different at home the next day. And so what we're working towards is having that same consistent response every single time, so that the student knows what to expect. And I do think that helps with their level of regulation, because it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise.
I often feel like many of the students in your school and in this community in particular, they feel the safest at school.
Right. Right.
And so because it is consistent, and because it is, they know that the adults within their life with it there are actually there for the purpose of helping them. And so it's a different perspective than some of the other communities, and a different set of challenges than a lot of other communities have to contend with.
Right. Right. And I also think that same standard applies to the staff as well. I mean, they need to know that the response is going to be consistent. And there's another step to that too. I actually had a conversation on Monday with a teacher where I went to the teacher and I said, listen, I wasn't able to be as responsive today as I wanted to be, and here's why. And once the teacher kind of understood why I wasn't able to, or some of the other folks here who would normally respond to calls for help weren't able to, it really helps the teacher understand that, okay, the support's not being pulled away, but there were some other things going on. And I think that that's super important as well, because when you have the situation where you're working in a school, to have staff know that the support's going to be there because it does help with regulation all the way around,
Yeah.
and then it's gone, well, now you've dysregulated the system. And
Yeah.
so you have to do some work to repair that.
Yeah, for sure. Because if they get scared about that again, that causes their whole fight or flight to go up,
Exactly.
and then we see more absenteeism and all the other fun stuff that comes along with high stress and the negative effects of that and everything.
Yeah.
What do you do with individuals who have chronic calls for support? The students that seem to always be on the radar, that are always having those calls. How do you address those needs?
So you're talking specifically about staff, correct?
Staff and the students. So if
Yeah.
you're having staff that are calling on certain students, on a daily basis or
Right.
even a weekly basis,
So the way I approach that is to connect that teacher or that staff member with some resources. So for example, I will suggest to them, hey, I see this might be something that has come up a couple of times. Take a look at this research. Take a look at this text. I'm also a big proponent of setting up coaching relationships among the staff. So I go to some of the veteran teachers and I say things like, hey, your neighbor next door is struggling with this, but you know how to do it really well. Are you comfortable with that teacher coming into your classroom to see how you do it? And I'll cover that teacher, and I reverse it as well. I have the veteran teacher go into the room of the person who might be struggling a little bit, and cover that other teacher, so that the teacher who has that skill can coach in the moment with the teacher who's struggling in the classroom.
Yeah, and that's great, because peer-to-peer support is huge, especially at developing community and trust
Yeah.
and teamwork.
And I will actually say, I'll share that, we did that. I did that several times last year with a teacher who had was constantly calling for support, and granted, it's only September, and I don't say that to be disrespectful, but that person is having a very different school year than they had last year in a positive way.
Yeah, let's knock on some wood for a
Yeah,
moment.
right, exactly.
Because we don't want that to change.
No, yeah, for sure.
We just want it to get better.
Well, I also think that, again, it goes back to the regulation and being visible and creating or having support for teachers. They need to know that they can grow their skills. They need to know that a bad day today does not mean that tomorrow is going to be equally as bad. And when you're stuck in that constant fight or flight mode, it's really hard for an educator to have that vision, maybe even a little bit hard to have that hope that tomorrow is going to be a different day. So from my perspective, part of my job is to create those situations where the teacher can develop that hope, or can develop the idea and the concept that today might have been rough, but tomorrow will definitely be different.
Right. And that's really tough for a lot of people when they get into that cycle of, ooh, this has been tough, this has been challenging, and then they really start to operate in the everything's tough and that it's always tough and I'm really having a tough time, and they start to focus more on themselves and what's going on right around them, instead of reaching out and being able to say, my neighbor might be having a tough time, let me tap in and help them, and I learned something from that I can apply. It gets tougher and tougher for them if they end up, their world is shrinking because they're in stress.
Right. And the conversation is triggering a memory for me where, one of those pieces of support, I do have teachers come to me, both veteran and newer teachers come to me and say, hey, this mom or dad is really upset. They've reached out to me. This is what it looks like. And my guidance to them is, you should respond first as the classroom teacher. And if it comes back where they're giving you a harder time, that's when I will step in. So again, it's creating that reassurance that there's somebody who has their back.
Right. And also, what a great thing that the parent is actually reaching out because they're concerned about something.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we don't see that. Sometimes
No.
we have kids who we don't hear from their connections and their guardians and everything else. So the fact that they're reaching out, they care and they want to collaborate. They just don't know how. Sometimes
I was just going to say, one of the things that I work on with teachers is you almost have to, in your response, show the parent how to do this, because if they're reaching out and it is a little bit disrespectful or a little bit terse, it might just be because they don't know how to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a whole chapter of that actually in the book on how educators can connect with parents and with administrators, because sometimes that's extremely intimidating for them to be able to do in a positive way, so
Yep.
that it comes across and isn't, taken from and doesn't spur into something else that could become additionally negative,
Very true.
especially with families, because sometimes that's that's a fine line that we
Always
walk
is it.
at times, for sure. So higher level skills. I know sometimes that this is a tough area because you have kids coming in who are not feeling safe, not feeling regulated, and then having to address higher level skills. Your school does such a great job with providing food resources and clothing resources and all those sorts of basic need resources, that are just vital to at least get them to a point where we can start to help them learn and everything. But sometimes it's challenging for people to realize that we have to address the psychological safety too. And how do you convey that to staff so that they're making sure that their students are psychologically well, but they are also?
So that's a great question, and that's something that I work with or work on frequently, and I'll tell you why.
I see it every time I'm in your building.
Well, there's a lot there can, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't mean it that way. There is a mindset of, student X did this in my classroom and I sent them out. I want them to have a consequence. And at the same time, if those Maslow type needs are not met, then the consequence itself isn't even going to matter. So
Right.
one of the things that I've been working on with teachers is, it might look like, hey, the social worker is doing playtime, but what they're really doing is creating that safe regulation space for the child, so that then we can do the teaching part of why that choice you made might not have been the best thing. And that's challenging, because when a teacher is upset because a child just trashed the room, or they might have been really disrespectful, to see that child with a behavior expert or with a social worker, and they're playing, it's not just play. There's a purpose behind it. And so that's been a hard thing to get people to understand, that we're doing the play so that we can get over here.
Right.
But I think we're starting to make some steps with that.
Yeah. Play has to become before learn. And I think that's
Right.
hard for people to wrap their heads around sometimes. I mean, you've got to have safety, regulation, play,
Right.
peer connection or social connection, then learn.
And I share that because in answer to your question, because it is one of those pieces that we're using to get to some of those higher level thinking skills for our kids. Because if they can't walk, they're certainly not going to be able to run.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, but they are running. I see them running
Yes,
more and more.
yes,
Great.
sometimes literally.
Jay, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our community?
um, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but definitely, I I tell people all the time that this is the world's greatest job. It's exhausting, and you're going to feel days when it's like really stressful, and you might question your life choices. But at the end of it, you are making a difference for some little
Are.
kids who need that safety, who need the consistency of knowing that this is the way Mr. Lewis is always going to respond, or this is the way my teacher is always going to respond, or if I melt down, that there's going to be support for me to get me back in the right direction. There again, creating some of that safety.
Absolutely. And for the staff too, because
Yeah,
they building went without an administrator for a period of time. And for them to feel safe and confident and comfortable with that situation, I think has made all the difference in the
yeah,
world.
I
Truly.
agree.
So
I,
always a pleasure to work with you, Jay. It
absolute
really
same,
is. I
same.
love being in your building.
It's a great place. It really is. The kids are
Really is.
adorable, and they're learning. We're making some big
They
progress.
are. They are making progress in so many ways and learning so many lifelong skills. I just love to see it. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And we just had a ball today. We hope that you are able to join us again.